myself. So, hi, my name is Sierra, President. I am an intern here with Office of Ethics and Policy. This is my second semester interning here. And the purpose of this is just to begin our conversations for Global Ethics Month.
All right, and I guess I can go next. My name is Jimmy. I am a senior, and this is my second time working with the Office of Ethics and Policy as an intern. I'm excited to get into this interview because, mental health and athletics is very important, and it's an issue that's standing out a little bit more recently. So, yeah, I'm excited to get into it.
And I'm Dr. Jeni Shannon. I'm the Director of Mental Health and Performance Psychology with the University of North Carolina Athletics. I've been with the university in some capacity since 2014 and in my current role since January 2017. Glad to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you here.
Just to begin, can you start by telling us a little bit about your role here at UNC, what brought you here?
Absolutely. So I started here as a contract provider. So I'm a licensed psychologist and a certified mental performance consultant, which means I work with athletes on kind of the full range of their human experiences, from mental health concerns to things that might come up with the mental side of the game on the field. So initially I was here just a day a week, working with somebody else who was also here just a day a week. And then over time, we saw more and more of a need for more comprehensive services for student athletes. So in January 2017, I came on as the first full-time provider with our mental health and performance psychology program. And we've really been able to grow it since. So my role now definitely looks different. I oversee a staff of 2 licensed providers, as well as 3 folks that are in some stage of training that we supervise, and we provide mental health services and performance psychology services to the over 800 varsity student athletes here at UNC. In addition to kind of the one-on-one services we do, we work with a lot of teams. We provide a lot of education, outreach, programming, things like that. And we also work really closely with our coaches and support staff to make sure they're able to support their student athletes in the best way possible.
That's amazing. And is there anything that kind of inspired you to get into this career path? Anything like maybe whenever you were younger or anything you had seen?
Yeah, so I was a competitive gymnast my whole life growing up pretty much, and was intending to walk on to my college team. That was the plan. And I actually ended up getting injured my senior year of high school and not able to come back from that. And so there's kind of 2 ways that led me to this path. One, I really struggled with all of a sudden kind of losing this career, this identity that I had had for so long. And I also got into coaching at that time. And through coaching and working with athletes in that capacity, I really got interested in the mental side of the sport, as well as kind of wanting to support athletes in ways other than kind of the skills and the mechanics of what they were doing. So, the turn that my path took really kind of led me to this.
That's really interesting to note. So with that, how would the lessons you learn with gymnastics and just how would lessons in sports in general just kind of help with a person's well-being and help with, lessons in life?
Yeah, I think it's really individual. Really depends on kind of the sport context they're in, the sport environment. The longer I do this, the more I reflect on my own experiences. I think the environments that we create make the biggest difference for whether it's kind of a wellness supporting space or one that maybe can bring on more challenges. So, I think one thing we think about often here is that there's a lot of protective factors that happen for folks who are part of teams and sports. And, obviously getting physical activity and exercise is something that's good for both our mental health and physical health. But there's also some really important aspects of being able to be a part of a team, having a sense of belonging, being in a place where you feel valued, being in a place where strengths are reinforced. All of those things can be really helpful. I also think in my personal experience in sport in general, learning how to overcome adversity, develop resilience, that is inherent in think virtually any sport experience and one of the most important life skills that we can get. I think sport provides such a unique opportunity to kind of put yourself in positions where you encounter adversity on a whole continuum and really develop some of those skills of resilience that we all need in other parts of life.
Yeah, I think
sorry.
sorry about that. I think that's a really good answer. I think resilience is a really important thing to consider when you're navigating through life. So with that, what constitutes a healthy environment that creates resilience, that fosters resilience and creates a healthy team dynamic, and what is one that's unhealthy? And how can we ensure that this doesn't happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, kind of like I said, the longer I do this, the more I see the role of kind of the system and the environment around it. I think one of the critical factors are environments that see the person before the performer, before the athlete, that really recognize that this is somebody who is doing a sport. They are not defined by the sport. This is a human who is having the full range of human experiences, even though they're often expected to perform at really high levels or deal with a lot of pressure. So I think environments that really honor and respect everybody's kind of individual human experiences, value those, are some of the healthiest. I think the relationships that get built between coaches and athletes and among teammates are probably the most critical factor in it being a safe and supportive environment. Having those spaces where you feel that sense of belonging, where you feel cared about, where you feel like you are seen as a person and it's safe to show up just as you are. I think those are probably the most important factors. With that, I think comes balance. And I think athletes need balance to be healthy, functioning humans. And so that's something really important. And to kind of the flip side of your question, I think where we see unhealthy environments is when it's kind of in that all-consuming sport is the only thing that matters, win at all costs, like that more extreme side where somebody really begins to feel that their worth is kind of centered in their sport, they're defined by performance, they're valued differently based on performance. And that can lead to a lot of things that make it really challenging to be in a healthy space. So I think to the answer of how do we ensure that, it's hard, but I think it starts with awareness and the recognition that investing in relationships and healthy environments will ultimately lead to more successful teams, better performances, more sustainability. It will pay off dividends. It's harder. It's way harder to kind of invest in that, but it's absolutely worth it from both the human perspective and the performance perspective.
Yeah, and I think that there are a lot of different aspects of sports that bring out competing goods. So because of that, especially with younger athletes who still have their whole life ahead of them, how do you think they can balance between having short-term goals and long-term goals?
Yeah, I think, long-term goals are great. They keep us going, they keep us motivated. I think a big part is making sure those short-term goals align with the long-term goals, they're leading towards them, and making sure that the kind of goal setting with that is being made with that kind of sustainability in mind that can allow you to get to the long-term goals. I think an important part of all of it is just from an identity perspective, recognizing again that you're more than just an athlete. So as you're kind of balancing these goals that are more immediate versus the long terms, keeping in mind the whole kind of spectrum of who you are as a human and just really being mindful that short-term goals aren't taking away from maybe the non-sport human goals that you have. So I just think it takes a deep level of awareness, a lot of attunement to values and identity and who you want to be right now and who you want to be in the future.
Yeah, you just talked about like the importance of like the self perspective of being an athlete. How do you think this impacts the role of also being like a student in a university? So being a student who is performing on the university's behalf, how should we balance the university's goal versus the students' goal?
I'm always inclined to lean towards really kind of honoring the human part of it. And so really tuning into like, what does that person want for themselves? What is meaningful for them? What is fulfilling for them? What aligns with their values? And ideally, in a perfect world, there's nice balance and the university goals and the athletic goals all align, but we know that's not always the case. And in my experience, there's not a right or wrong. It's certainly not as black and white, and it's also not fixed. Like there's certainly times I think our athletes might put more of their effort, focus, energy into their athletic goals. And then when they're in the off season, they might have a little more capacity and bandwidth to invest more in their career goals, in their academic goals. It might vary day to day. On an off day, they might have more energy to put towards those goals. And on a day they're competing, they might have to be really tunnel vision. So I think it's kind of going for an overall net balance. If at the end of the day we can kind of see that somebody is really balanced and really honored what feels most meaningful and fulfilling to them, then I think that's the best way to navigate that.
And so kind of following off of that, how do you think that, especially in college sports, students should be able to balance, becoming the best version of their self athletically now and also pushing through things like injuries while also promoting health and wellness? So how do you think we balance both of those things while also being in the university environment?
Yeah, it's a challenge. I think our student athletes are pulled in so many directions in the moment, as well as kind of thinking about future, and future is really uncertain in athletics. You never know when an injury will take you out. You never know when something will happen and your career ends before you intended it to. So there's a lot that comes with that. And it sounded like one of the things you were kind of speaking to is like, how do we manage like pushing through an injury, knowing there could be long-term consequences, but we need to play in the game, tomorrow. And I think that's certainly a situation that's very tricky to navigate. Luckily, we have a fantastic sports medicine staff who does a really good job of protecting the student athletes' interests and well-being. I'm part of the sports medicine staff, and we all hold that well-being in front of any degree of performance, any outcome, anything like that. We want to make sure the athletes are safe and healthy and doing what is right for them. Now, that said, I think they're adults. We want to empower them when it's not too dangerous to do so, to make their own decisions. So to me, it's about transparency and honesty and really helping them reflect on what are the potential ways this aligns with your long-term goals and what are the potential ways this could be problematic. What feels like the right decision for you right now? So kind of supporting them in that decision-making process, but with as much transparency and honesty as possible, and really empowering them. I think with all this, making sure that student athletes really develop this sense of they are more than their sport. They are more than an athlete, that they have identities and values, and meaning outside of it also helps them, I think, make decisions from a more grounded place, because they know they're more than this, and their well-being or their worth doesn't depend on the next performance.
So one more question, kind of going off of that same topic. You're talking about how the athlete's self is, like you said before, more important than any other thing. How do we go past balancing it with injury, but balancing something like burnout and ensuring that the athlete, especially if they do still like and enjoy the sport, that they have the bandwidth to continue in it, even whenever things feel a little more stressed for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think we are seeing higher and higher levels of burnout with athletes. I think part of it is the way, everything in youth sports has escalated. So they're coming in a little more depleted than they were maybe, 5-10 years ago. And then the demands of college sports are just so intense. And so I think this is one of the places our department really comes in, where we can help student athletes build coping skills, build skills around resilience, have a space to kind of name what they're feeling and know that it's really normal and okay. And also help empower them to ask for what they need, to advocate for themselves if they need a day, if they need a week, if they need to take some space in order to come back as their best self. We really try to help them in that process. I know some of our teams have given their student athletes mental health days that they can take, no questions asked, things like that. I think some of our teams are really attuned to the times of the year that maybe student athletes are more overwhelmed and make more things optional. And I think things like that, just that attunement to what's happening outside the sport arena and providing some flexibility around that, because we all have our limits, we all hit our capacity, and we can only do so much once we're at capacity. So I think just kind of everyone in the system, everyone in the environment, recognizing when somebody is getting to that space and surrounding them with support and figuring out what can we do, even if it means stepping away temporarily so you can come back as your best self.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I'd imagine it's a very high pressure environment for a lot of these athletes, and having to navigate that and just kind of carry on their own mental health. I'd imagine it's a challenge. How do you, as well as your organization, go about kind of encouraging students to reflect upon their mental health and kind of think about their mental health as an athlete?
Yeah, I think this is something that we've been really intentional about. And, with that, making sure that we are not only talking about mental health when things are bad. Mental health is not just the absence of mental illness. It's actually being in a place of thriving and doing well. And just like our physical health, that takes work. You're not healthy just because you don't have a disease. You have to actively do some things to foster that. So we really treat mental health the same way. And I think we've approached it in a number of ways. We try to be really proactive by early on in the year, making sure we do a mental health screening with all our student athletes and let them know about all the services we offer. So if they do start to feel like they're struggling in this environment or with the pressure or adjusting, that they know they've got avenues and resources. And we really encourage kind of that proactive early intervention. Definitely helpful to do that. I think some of the other things we've really worked on doing to kind of manage this is there's a lot of teams that myself and my staff meet with on a regular basis. And sometimes we're working on performance stuff, but a lot of times we're incorporating things that are also just general life skills, mental health fostering skills. For example, I start almost all of my team sessions with some breath work and mindfulness. And so we're just kind of infusing different things to help our student athletes manage the demands where we can. I think we've also done a lot more to try and educate our coaches and help them see that they're the ones these student athletes are with day in and day out. They will always see their coach more than they will see me. So equipping our coaches to notice early on if somebody is struggling and to know how to have a supportive conversation with them. Also talking about kind of those environmental pieces of how do we create supportive, resilient environments. We really try to empower anybody who is in contact with our student athletes to be able to check in, provide support, and be a presence in their life that can help kind of foster their well-being. So, we try to kind of hit it from all different angles and incorporate it into things they're already doing where we can.
That's really interesting. And thought it was particularly interesting that you mentioned kind of preparing for, life after and just kind of mindfulness skills and preparing for how to frame your state of mind and keep that in check. How does the university kind of prepare students and as well as athletes for life after, after athletics?
Yeah, I think that's an area we can do a better job with. It's one of those things that we know is challenging for students and student athletes alike to kind of navigate that transition out of the university setting, into the next chapter of their lives. And so I think we've been trying to start to develop a little bit of programming here. And I do think it's the responsibility of the athletic department of the university to provide spaces and opportunities to learn these sorts of things. You know, we've seen with our student athletes, for example, some really basic questions come up around how do I eat when I'm not training 20 plus hours a week? What's it like to work out if somebody isn't telling me exactly what to do? Most of our student athletes have had all their kind of physical activity, movement, exercise structured for them since they were 5, 6, 7, 8, you know? And so now even things like that come up. But I think the other piece that really comes up is that identity piece. For the vast majority of our student athletes, once their collegiate career is done, their formal athletic career is done. We certainly have folks that go on to play professionally, or folks that are able to kind of stay involved in the sport in some level. But most, when their eligibility is up, are done. And so we have to explore, who am I without this? Because a lot of them have not had the opportunity or space to really give some thought to that. So, you know, I think we can do a better job of introducing this concept from the beginning. I think most often we start to talk about it and think about it in that spring semester before they graduate. And I think we can start to plant the seeds with folks when they get here about diversifying their identities and sense of self, finding, you know, different ways to understand who they are and the value they bring, and kind of building that as we go, but also being really intentional towards the end of their career of addressing, like, yeah, life's going to look really different. What's going to be challenging for you? Okay, how can we plan for that? And I think we've done it in small ways, but I think we can do it in much better ways. And I hear from student athletes after they've graduated all the time, you know, like 6 months down the road, they're like, whoa, I'm really struggling. Can you give me the name of a therapist I can see? And so I'd love for us to be able to help them kind of navigate that transition better.
And whenever students especially encounter different violations or break any school or NCAA rules, how do you think the university can help balance between helping the student learn that this should have been a learning opportunity, punishing the student, and also just adhering to the rule in violation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, I think there's got to be consistency, and we can hold a sanction or a boundary or whatever it is while being compassionate and curious. You know, it's something that we've talked with our coaches about too. Like, often if somebody has broken a rule or done something, you know, that we deem as wrong, there's typically something going on underneath it. You know, everybody's doing the best they can with what they have. We are all good and doing what we can, but sometimes there's something underneath the surface. And so I really encourage anybody having these conversations, coaches, parents, faculty, to lead with curiosity, to be able to be compassionate in that and be like, hey, this isn't like you. I'm wondering what's going on for you. Hey, this happened. Can you help me understand? I think asking more questions rather than jumping right into lectures and punishments, that's where we get the learning opportunity. And I think even when, you know, we do have to hand down a consequence that's big or serious, we can still do that compassionately. We can say, like, listen, you know, I know this was out of character for you. I know you had a lot going on. I definitely want to help you get what you need to work through this. And here is the consequence. What kind of support do you need while you're dealing with the consequence? You know, and I think that's a part that's often missed. Like, it's hard to have gotten in trouble. It's hard to have a big consequence to deal with. And no matter how wrong the violation was, there's still a human who might need some support through it. So again, we have to hold our standards. That's real, but I think we can lead with curiosity, and I think we can respond with compassion, and that's where it becomes more of that learning experience and not a shame-inducing, you know, punitive experience.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think kind of the idea of just athletes getting shamed for what their actions are, I think it's a very important thing to discuss. And I think that it's one that's personally comes up a lot, or one that comes up a lot, that I see a lot happening. So with that, and with a lot of NCAA rules, there's one that's kind of coming out in particular, and that's the NIL deals and the emergence of that. How would you say that adds to kind of the mental health layering with athletes, and how would you say that adds more pressure to athletes as overall?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm currently on an NCAA mental health advisory group, and that's been a big part of our discussion in revising these mental health best practices that came out in 2016 before NIL was on the table. And, we're really being mindful of how we incorporate that into our guidance for schools, because I think there's certainly a lot of good that has come with NIL, but I think there was a lot of challenges that we didn't do a good job of proactively addressing. Where I see it be most problematic is because it's just another responsibility, it's another demand. I think our student athletes, especially those with the bigger NIL deals, sometimes feel like they have to be really focused on building their brand, and they have to be really attentive to their social media presence and what they're putting out there. And it takes a lot of time, energy, and effort when they don't have much to begin with. But I think also it gets a little confusing sometimes from the identity standpoint of you're almost like creating this influencer or outside persona that may or may not be who you are or line up with your values. And I don't know that we did a good enough job before this all came down to prepare athletes, and to even just have real conversations about like, hey, going into this, like, be really solid on your values and your boundaries and who you are and how you want to present yourself. Be really aware of where you might need to set some limits and do some different things to protect yourself in this, because it can get really consuming. It can feel like another job. And it can just kind of put, I think, some athletes in tough positions of like, okay, does this line up with who I want to be, how I want to present myself? I think the other side of it too is there's the potential to create tension on teams, and on a lot of teams, there's a pretty big divide between like people or a person who gets the big deals and then folks that don't get any or get smaller ones. And I think that can potentially take a toll on, team culture, team chemistry, team connection, lead to comparison and different feelings about that. So I think it's an area where it's certainly added stress. It's added an additional, I think, like you said, layer to the mental health conversation about what does it mean to have to kind of build this brand, manage this brand, put this brand out there, and also put myself in a vulnerable position where I might hear about it from more people because I'm more public than I was, or there's more opportunities for people to say something to me about me, etc. So, again, I don't think it's all bad, but I think we need to kind of step back and help athletes really think about how they make the decisions around NIL deals and how they protect themselves emotionally and mentally in that process.
So like looking at it from a different aspect, that causes, I guess, something else that will cause increased tensions within how athletes react to certain situations. How can we balance the impact that fans have on athletes, especially on their emotional and physical well-being on and off the field?
Yeah. Listen, this is where I hate social media, because there are so many fans, I'll use quotes because I don't think the people who talk like this are really fans, who really go after these student athletes that say some of the cruelest, harshest things on various social media platforms. And I think what it comes down to is people forget they're humans. And I know that might sound a little strange, but I think often athletes have this persona of they're superheroes, they're untouchable, they're invincible, they asked for this by being on this public stage. And that's not at all true. These are college student athletes. These are 18 to 24-year-olds who are doing the best they can in a sport that they've worked really hard for. And so I think, fans can be amazing and wonderful supporters, but I think the part that has more of an impact is when there's kind of those attacks. And again, they tend to happen mostly on social media, although we hear the stories of people, yelling racial and homophobic slurs at games, or, going after somebody, talking about their partner or something. Like, I've heard all these stories. And so, there's so many people out there, it's hard to know like what the intervention would actually be. But I think when it comes down to it, it's remembering that these are people, these are humans, these are college students. And let me tell you, no one's trying to mess up. Like, everybody is out there doing the best they can and trying to make everyone proud. And so I think it can have such a devastating impact. I hear it all the time. And so if every single fan can remember, this is a human, this is somebody's daughter or son, this is, somebody's best friend, like these are humans doing the best they can. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and before we move to just wrapping everything up, I do have one more question. So what do you think is the most important part to balancing the desire for a sport and also just maintaining a healthy participation in that same sport?
Yeah, I think it comes down to balance, and that's balance in time, it's balance in identity, it's balance in how much energy you're putting into it. Sports, wonderful, it's amazing. Like, I love working in this space, and I love seeing people optimize their performance and achieve huge things, but it can't be all consuming. It can't be everything. It can't feel defining. I think we really have to figure out that balance. And again, it's challenging and sometimes are harder than others, but keeping that human part of it at the forefront, empowering our athletes to know when they need rest, when they need a break, to know when they need to kind of work on themselves outside of that part that performs on the field or the court. I think we just have to find a balance, across the board. Easier said than done, I know, but I think that's the key to that.
So what words of wisdom do you personally have for students in balancing, just performing this great balancing act? I'm curious to know.
Yeah. I mean, I think kind of building off of what I said about the fans, I think for student athletes to remember they're human. I think finding self-compassion, because everyone's going to mess up. Everyone's going to have bad days and off days, and remembering that that's okay. Again, I think the phrase I use all the time is when I've said already, and like, everyone's doing the best they can with what they have. And some days you might have 60%. Great. Give 100% of that 60%. Other days you might have 98%. Amazing. Bring that. But honoring where you're at and letting that guide what you need. Again, we're going to have different days where we need different things. And there are going to be times we have to kind of suck it up and get the job done. But then after that, can you honor what you need? And I think this takes a slowing down and a checking in. That's something that I don't know that our student athletes get to do very often. And it's something I really try to encourage with all the teams and athletes I work on or work with. Like, take a minute, take a breath, notice how you're feeling, and let that guide what you need. Sometimes it is, we just have to kind of put our heads down and get through it. But there's always a moment when we're past that part where we can slow down, check in, and again, like, really listen to what we need. It's going to change every single day. There is no formula. There is no magic solution to this. I think it's about that awareness, that attunement, giving yourself some grace, and really just honoring what you need in any given moment so you can keep bringing your best, whatever your best is that day.
All right, so we are going to go ahead and wrap up. So one question that we had in particular was, you mentioned earlier that, You did gymnastics, and there was some adversity you dealt with there. Were there any mental health concerns with that you had to overcome and any adversity? And how does that relate to where you're at now? How does that relate to your position now?
Yeah, I think it's hard to get out of the world of gymnastics without some disordered eating. And I think for me, fortunate it didn't get to an extreme place, but that certainly sparked my interest in developing a specialty in treating disordered eating and eating disorders. So I think that's something that just for myself and every teammate I ever had was so present. We kind of couldn't get away from it. And so I looked back while I was in graduate school and was like, wow, that wasn't okay, kind of some of the messages that were sent. And so really have used that to work hard to kind of shift some of the culture about how we talk about food and bodies in sport and supporting student athletes with disordered eating. I think the other part was kind of coping with injury. When I was injured and I realized my career was likely over, of course, I had the whole range of reactions you would expect. And one of the big ones was grief. It's such a loss to lose a sport, to lose a path, to lose an identity. And I think I really realized through that experience just how much it is truly a grief experience for almost anybody that goes through an injury. And so that's been another one of the areas I've really enjoyed working with folks because I can relate. Obviously, everybody's experience is different, but I think there's a level of empathy and understanding that can come through. So I think those were kind of the biggest ones for me. I navigated on the mental performance side. I also feel like I just had a lot of mental blocks on balance beam and got really interested when I was coaching and how to help folks through that because it was something I had a hard time with. So I think most of us that get into this field have some personal experience and have some interests, and then we use that to inform kind of some of the areas we really learn a lot more about. And I think it creates a passion for helping others through those spaces. I think that's certainly been my experience.
All right. And is there anything else you would like to share with us about the intersection of athletics and health that we didn't talk about today? Anything you'd like to just kind of get across as we finish up this meeting here?
I think I've captured most of it. I think maybe the only other thing that hasn't necessarily been said explicitly is just we really see mental health just like we do physical health. And, a lot of times in the world of athletics, we get physical health, but there has historically been a pretty big stigma around mental health. I think we've done a great job at shifting that by having a lot of open conversations, having student athletes tell their stories, and really working with our entire staff here to treat mental health just like we do physical health, that it is a health issue that we can diagnose and treat and have a plan for. If somebody takes some time off for a mental health reason, then we have a return to play plan, just like we would with a physical injury. And so I think just continuing to shift the culture in athletics to make mental health as normalized as physical health, which all our athletes are so well versed in. So I don't think we're there yet, but I think we're moving in that direction. And for anybody who is in the world of athletics to really embrace that, I think will ultimately make a big difference.
I think those were all the questions that we had for you today. Thank you so much for just agreeing to speak with us. And I think you said some really informative things about just this intersection between mental health and overall well-being of athletes. So I think it's like UNC athletes will find a lot of important information from this, as well as just regular students who may, like you said, have been fans and have these behaviors that they may not have noticed. So thank you so much for just agreeing to do this with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for great questions, great conversation, and taking an interest in this area. I really appreciate it.